Next up, we're going to hear from Daisy Duarte and Ian Creamer. After years of caring for her mother, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2013, Ms. Duarte got the news that she too carried a gene for early onset familiar Alzheimer's. Ms. Duarte has gone on to use her diagnosis to advocate for Latinos suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Ms. Duarte is joined by Ian Creamer, who is Executive Director of the Leaders Engaged on Alzheimer's Disease Coalition, which is a diverse coalition of more than 90 organizations committing to stopping Alzheimer's disease. Joining them on stage is my colleague, The Hill's Editor-in-Chief, Bob Cusack. Bob, over to you.
Thanks, Johanna. And thanks for being here this morning. Daisy, I want to start with you. Can you describe how you became an activist and your family's experience with Alzheimer's?
Well, Alzheimer's has been in my family for years. I mean, it goes back to like 4 generations. So 75% of my family has been affected with the disease. So once my mom got diagnosed, I decided to take a stance for the disease. And then I got tested and I have the genetic mutation.
Was that a hard decision to undergo that test? Some people do, some people don't.
I didn't think twice. When they asked me, I said yes, and I don't regret it because I know what my future holds for me.
And can you describe your daily life now? It's changed as you've written extensively, caring for your mom. How has your life changed?
Well, my life's changed. I don't own my business anymore. I had a successful sports bar that I had for 5 years. I closed that down to take care of my mom full time, and my life is basically, it revolves around her.
Ian, what are the biggest misconceptions about Alzheimer's?
Boy, where to begin? I think one of the challenges that we have in our field is that so few people that are living with the disease actually know their diagnosis in a timely way. Often physicians will withhold the diagnosis. We know physicians who give the diagnosis do it beautifully, do it in a way that's empowering for families like Daisy's, but we also know there are far too many physicians that withhold that news because they falsely believe there's nothing to be done for the disease. And that's not true on a couple of levels. One is that there are medications on the market that help with symptoms. They don't modify the course of the disease, but they improve quality of life for those that are living with it. And just the empowerment of knowing what you are facing is vitally important because it enables you to make all sorts of other decisions in your life, whether, like with Daisy's family, to participate in clinical trials, to set a care path, to make legal and financial and spiritual decisions. So information and knowledge is empowering, and part of what we have to do is make sure that we fight stigma, not only among the general public, but also among the clinician community so that they can empower families like Daisy's.
Where are we as far as the science and the search for a cure?
It's a long and difficult road. I think we've seen that in headlines, and we know that from talking directly with the scientific community. But progress is being made, and part of that is being empowered by what Congress and federal agencies, and again, families like Daisy's are doing. It's people coming forward and saying, I want to be part of the solution, and then Congress and federal agencies coming together to make sure that NIH and the academic research community, and also the biomedical research community and the private sector have the tools to advance the science to bring us to better means of prevention, treatment, and cure.
Daisy, as far as educating people, and specifically the Latino community, what do you do along those lines, and what more needs to be done, do you think?
I myself, working with Latinos Against Alzheimer's, we try and reach the Latino community because they like to sweep things under the rug. We always say, oh, the person's just, just showing signs of aging when it's not, when it's a disease.
So a lot of denial.
Yeah, a lot of denial. And it's not only just the Latinos, but also the African American community is the same way. We need to take a stance to the disease, and I feel that the more I speak out about my life, I see the other Hispanics or Latinos or African Americans take a stance for it too, and get involved in clinical trials.
Ian, I was looking at the congressional record, and in the last Congress, there were 429 mentions of Alzheimer's. In 1981, 1982, there were 4. Can you describe where we talked a little bit backstage about the stigma and how, through the help of education and efforts by a lot of experts like yourself, but where's the stigma gone, and what more needs to be done? Because that's less of an issue than it was 10, 20 years ago.
Right, so I think we've made tremendous progress around awareness more people know Alzheimer's is out there. They know some of the statistics. They know that it matters. On Capitol Hill, they know what it does to our federal budget. But I think there's a misunderstanding that if you, upon getting a diagnosis, that it's essentially not only an eventual death sentence, but an immediate one. They think that you go from 0 to 60 or maybe 60 to 0 in terms of quality of life. And there's a tremendous amount that we can do to empower people to have long, rich, fulfilling lives living with this disease. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't enormous challenges. It doesn't mean the disease isn't fatal at this point, but it means that we have to give people hope to have meaningful, rich, fully lived lives, not say that as soon as you get a diagnosis, you need to go into the shadows.
What is, as far as like DC policymakers, Congress, the administration, what are they doing right and what could they be doing more of?
So everything they're doing right, they could do better. Congress has been incredibly robust, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, in pumping money into Alzheimer's and related dementias research, primarily through NIH. The federal agencies, CMS, VA, FDA, and others, ACL, have done remarkable work trying to expand what we know about the disease and how we pursue not only science, but quality of life for those who are facing it today. And yet we need more of all of that. And I will tell you 2 things that cause those of us in the advocacy community to lose a lot of sleep. One is the federal hiring freeze. And at one of the Hills events, shortly after the election, I, in the audience, raised this question. If we are infusing more money into NIH, but we are not allowing them the flexibility to hire the staff they need to administer the grants, what do we suppose is going to happen to the quality of the supervision of those grant programs? They need to be freed from the hiring freeze. And I think the same could be said for a number of other federal agencies that work on dementia science and quality of life policy. The other, I would say, is that CMS, and they have a request for information out right now at the Innovation Center. It closes Monday. The Innovation Center needs to hear more from all of us around this country about the urgency of advancing evidence-based care and support programs to improve quality of life for families like Daisy's that are fighting this now and will fight it tomorrow.
Daisy, you've written about how you become an activist, but that you were kind of the quiet one. Now, you also wrote that you were a party animal at one point, I saw it. So, but that transformation of becoming an activist, was that easy or was that difficult?
It wasn't difficult because after you see so many family members die with this disease, you know, either you become one of them, another statistic, and doesn't do nothing about it, or you take a stance. You don't want it to keep going on. So I just took a stance. I didn't think twice about it.
And when you talk to people, what surprises them when you try to educate them on the disease? Do they not know?
A lot of the Latinos that I speak with, they always say, well, we just thought they were going crazy, or, you know, it's just a stigma that the disease has. Like, people just think that they're going crazy and they don't have a disease. So a lot of people tell me, wow, I didn't know that.
We'll open up for questions in a couple minutes. Ian, just on the international front, what has happened? What are other countries doing?
So a lot of good science being done internationally. I think there are also tremendous issues with first world, third world disparities in terms of where the resources are going to be invested, not only to help us find a cure, but once we've got a cure, being able to have access globally. The likely cost and possibly complexity of therapy is going to be a major challenge. It's one that I know that industry is committed to solving, and I hope that governments around the world, in developing societies as well as developed societies, will tackle in a proactive way to make sure that effective interventions, whether, again, care and support or disease modification, are available to everyone in need. We have about 5.5 million people in this country living with dementia today. Globally, it's closer to 50 million. And we don't need a first world solution, we need a full world solution. So collaboration is going to be the name of the game, whether it's advancing the science or finding new means of care and support, and applying those both more broadly to reach more people in need.
On that point on collaboration, what can healthcare stakeholders, providers do to help more?
So some providers are themselves international companies, and best practices can cross borders as long as there's a regulatory environment that allows that. There is work on the science side to make sure there's regulatory alignment. We need to make sure that health systems globally also are adaptive and willing to learn from each other, that there aren't always the best solutions in any one country, but we can share those best practices across borders.
Is there, a realistic timeline of when, there have been articles over the years that it's maybe 5 years away or 10 years away? What's a realistic timeline?
If I knew that, I would probably be doing different work. It's crystal ball to say I know when that answer is going to come. What I can tell you is that the biomedical solution will not be a silver bullet. It's not going to be one size fits all. Dementia is a diverse set of diseases. There are literally 100 diseases and conditions that lead to this family of symptoms we think of as dementia. If you just look at Alzheimer's, which accounts for somewhere between 60 and 80% of the cases of dementia in the United States, even that, I think we're going to see some fragmentation of the biomedical solutions that we need. Not every individuals experience either the progression of their symptoms or the nature of the organic disease is going to be identical. People get it at different stages in life. They have different genetic risk factors, different behavioral and lifestyle issues that they're trying to deal with. And most people with Alzheimer's and related dementias have a variety of comorbidities that also need to be treated, but where that treatment or that disease may affect the efficacy of the Alzheimer's or other dementia drug.
Why don't we open up for questions? If you have a question for Daisy or Ian, please just identify yourself and then ask your question. Be in the front. Wait for the mic. Hold on a sec.
My name is Bill Preston. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. My question is, do you think healthcare systems are really prepared for this? I mean, I just don't see it as I travel around the world, because I'm a caretaker of a 92-year-old uncle with Alzheimer's. It has been a rough decade. I mean, I've had to give up my pharmaceutical job in order to be a caretaker because you have to make the difficult choice. But I don't see healthcare systems prepared for this. So just wanted to get your take on it. Thank you.
Daisy, did you want to go first, or do you want me to? Oh. Well, thank you for what you're doing for your family, and thank you for bringing your story out for others to hear. I think that's one of the most important things any of us can do. Daisy's doing it, you're doing it, so many others are sharing their stories and normalizing the conversations about brain health, but also about brain disease. And that I think is where change begins. In terms of health systems, no, I would agree with you. They're not prepared. I think they're trying to be prepared. They're doing their level best now. But the landscape is changing, and we have to change in anticipation of where it's going to need to be. So the RAND report talks about the need for a different level of workforce development, about infusion centers and other resources. And just payer models, I think, also have to evolve to understand not only what's coming down the pike in terms of what particular pharmaceutical products might cost on a per patient basis, but also what it takes for families like yours and Daisy's to sustain this effort of family caregiving. And caregiving in an Alzheimer's or dementia environment is very different than what we typically think of as family caregiving. I'm not saying one is better or worse, harder or easier, it's just different, in part because of the level of responsibility that gets progressively deeper and deeper as the disease makes the individual less and less capable of setting their own course. That happens later in the disease, but you have to prepare for it early. The other part is that so many people who are Alzheimer's family caregivers, your story, Daisy's, are not atypical, have to give up everything else, because this kind of caregiving tends not to be episodic. It tends to be sustained, and often over anywhere from 8 to 20 plus years. I'll stop on this point. A good friend of mine who has since passed away, retired Rear Admiral, World War II hero, spent 22 years caring for his wife who had Alzheimer's, and he was in it every day, including after she moved to residential care. He was there all day, almost every day for her. That changed his life, his adult children's lives, and the lives of so many people that he could have touched if his life was not consumed with this journey.
Question in the front.
Kathy Siggins, and I'm a former caregiver for my late husband. Daisy, I know that the clinical trials are very, very important. How do you get past the fear of taking part in these clinical trials?
I'm different. I don't have a fear. The way I look at it is I'm in a clinical trial I'm going to find a cure for this disease. It's not going to take another person in my family's life. That's the mindset I'm set with. So I'm taking Alzheimer's head on, like it's taking my mom. It's not going to take me.
One more question. We have one over here. Oh, right there. Last question.
You. I'm Audrey Shepard, and I'd like you all to address the gender differences in Alzheimer's, if you would, and dementia.
Well, we know that women are most likely to get it.
Is it overwhelmingly? What's the percentage?
So about 2/3 of people with Alzheimer's disease are women, and about 2/3 of caregivers in the United States are women. The proportion of caregiving is changing a bit. Men are beginning to step up. We're still behind. We're not pulling our weight, but we're beginning to see some change in that. There are a lot of theories about why this is disproportionately a woman's disease, but I do think it's important to think of it in that context as a women's health issue where men are also part of the equation and part of the solution. But it points to a real problem in our clinical trial pipeline that we tend to have majority populations in terms of ethnicity and in terms of economic advantage in clinical trials, and we don't have the diversity in clinical trials. It's hard to recruit more diverse participants, but we have to find a way to do it, and we know trials that are successful in doing it that have more female representation in proportion to burden of disease, and communities of color and lower income and lower education. Part of the challenge in clinical trials is that most clinical trials require a study partner, and not everyone living with this disease has a study partner, a well family member who's available or willing to participate. There have to be ways that we find to get around that and to make the trials valid and viable and successful, but with less burden on families and individuals who want to participate.
That's all the time we have for this segment. I want to hand it over to Johanna. Please thank Daisy and Ian.